saddened by them. Anyone who saw them, I think, was. But you don't have to look far in the United States for moral outrages also on video. And there's not a city in this country, not just the big cities, but cities of 10,000 people. I was in one yesterday that doesn't have some constellation of drug-addicted young people living outside. We call them the homeless. They're drug addicts. And they're addicted to drugs that were imported across an open border, allowed by the Biden administration. And they're dying, more than 100,000 a year. Now, you can call it genocide, you can call it whatever you want, but it's the death of over 100,000 Americans a year and the living death of millions more who are living outside. So sure. I don't understand. People are outraged by what happened in Israel. And again, I want to add my voice to that because I'm a human being. But the scale of the outrage among Republican presidential candidates was so much more intense. One of them took to a bullhorn and started yelling about it. I get it. But no one would think to do that about the 100,000 American young people murdered every year, and they are murdered, honestly, by
give me a
synthetic
bullhorn for that
opioids.
one.
Like,
Chuck.
what?
I'll take my bullhorn for that one. And let's just go a little bit deeper on that one. This is the product of some intentional design. I mean, there are literally synthetic precursors to make synthetic fentanyl coming from Wuhan, of all places, to Mexican drug cartels south of our own border, pumping that up. And you want to just numbers to get the scale intact. 50 times the number of people who died on 9/11 are going to die this year as a consequence of fentanyl just crossing our southern border. A couple days ago, I was actually at our northern border in the northern part of New Hampshire. Totally wide open border. I mean, to call this porous is an overstatement. It's just an open border. And there was enough fentanyl that crossed just last year, 2022, to kill 3+ million Americans. That was just the amount that was caught, let alone the amount that wasn't. And so this is the product of intentional design. People will say, is that because of a drug epidemic in demand? You know, that's a separate debate, but a lot of that fentanyl is being laced into. People who are taking it have no idea that they're taking fentanyl, taking other drugs that have fentanyl in it that's killing them on the spot. That's closer to bioterrorism. Nobody would call it an overdose if you put it in a Big Mac. There is no level of moral outrage. Forget the Democratic Party. I've written that one off. In the Republican Party, of the same scale of this incursion right here at home. And so one of the things that allies do is they learn from each other. I think that intelligence sharing operations is critical with allies, with Israel and otherwise. I think one of the things we can do is learn from both the successes and, in this case, a bad failure in the case of our ally. To say if we have borders that are as open as ours, even Israel that had a border as tightly protected as its own saw this happen, we could have far worse or the equivalent happening right here at home. I mean, other things that nobody's talking about, Tucker, is not just border defenses. We don't have an Iron Dome in this country, yet we're vulnerable to nuclear missile attacks any given day, and we're marching closer into nuclear conflict in multiple parts of the world, most notably with Russia. Think about cyber defenses. And if that really was a cyber attack, or whatever explanation it might be for why Israel was caught off guard, we're vulnerable to cyber attacks in this country. Electromagnetic pulse attacks, nobody's talking about, that could take out our electric grid, which, by the way, has 60 Chinese transformers in it. You want to talk about space-based defenses, totally missing in the United States of America. That's where my outrage is highest, is our own vulnerability right here in the homeland. And I do not think that it is crass. I think it is the morally correct answer for leaders of nations to ask how they protect the interests of their nation. That comes with allies. And so I think that it is important not to create an equivalence between Hamas and Israel, as some on the American left and European left are trying to do. It is wrong what happened to Israel. And I call that out as a human being and as somebody who's on a belief of some people are on the right side and the wrong side of a conflict. I think that that is far clearer here than it is, for example, in the Russia-Ukraine conflict or other areas where people have baked that cake. But the selective nature of ignoring certain other conflicts, while even more importantly, ignoring the interests of the U.S. right here at home, is what irritates the heck out of me, out of the politicians in both parties. And it is shameful. And I think that there are, frankly, financial and corrupting influences that lead them exactly to speak the way they do. That's just the hard truth.
How could you pay for a much-needed defense system in another country but not in your own country? I don't understand that. I mean, how can you pretend to be a leader in your country if you're doing something like that? It seems so immoral to me.
Well, pretending is a good word to use. I do think it's immoral, Tucker, to abandon completely abdicate defending our own border, yet worrying about other people's borders more than we worry about our own. That's not to legitimize anything that's happening in other parts of the world. Far from
Obviously
it deserves to be condemned. But start, if you're the president of the United States, your obligation is to your homeland. Defend your homeland. People will say in response, and I get this, right, from the other presidential candidates, oh, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. You are neither walking nor chewing gum. You are absolutely leaving our country vulnerable to every form of attack until it's too late. But then it's one thing, Tucker, to say that, okay, people come to this conclusion if this is a new question. This isn't a new question. We spent $3 trillion in Iraq and in Afghanistan. To what end exactly? Is the Taliban still in control in Afghanistan? In Iraq, we still have hostile, effectively anti-American control, vulnerable to Iranian incursion as well while we're at it. To what end? And so if you don't learn from the mistakes of the past, it's not like we haven't had plenty of opportunities to reflect on that in the recent past. If you don't learn from those mistakes in the past, you're destined to make the same mistakes in the future. And right now we're in a position that's even more bankrupt, even more in the hole, $33 trillion in the hole, than we were when we marched our way into those foreign wars last time around. So I think it's important to be clear about what we will and won't do as the United States of America. That gives clarity to our allies.